Eagles Entertainment.
The journey to the draft is driven by AAA. AAA, roadside is their strong side. Make AAA a part of your game day today. AAA, go ahead.
With the 25th pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. I'm your host, Fran Duffy. Thanksgiving in the rearview mirror. It is past us, and it's kind of a tentpole for college football as things are beginning to start taking shape around the country with the college football playoff. What will the postseason look like in this unique college football year? Well, it'll be interesting. It'll be up to much debate, obviously, over the next few weeks. But the NFL Draft, teams are starting to get more and more interested in who these top prospects are. So make sure you're tuned in right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. We are always here twice a week, and these early week episodes, when we're in season, all have the kind of the same format. We're going to start things off with our scout stories. We are the only NFL Draft podcast that has a current NFL scout on the show each and every week. And this week, Senior Director of College Scouting, Ahsante Samuel, will once again join us here on the show to talk about scouting Eagles running back Corey Clement when he was coming out of Wisconsin. So we'll talk about all the things that were there with Corey when he was coming out. Really an interesting discussion here that shows up with Corey Clement. I hope you guys enjoy that at the very top of the show. After that, we're going to go into Saturday Scouting. Myself, Ben Fennell, Dane Brugler, a bunch of our reactions from this past week in college football. We'll talk through some Senior Bowl acceptances, some underclassmen declaring for the draft, and Dane's got a new mock draft, so we'll talk all about that in Saturday Scouting. Then we've got our On the Clock segment. C-Mac's going to come back to the show, and he's going to kind of moderate that debate between Ben, Dane, and I. The topic this week, who is the best red zone weapon in this draft? And then we'll wrap it up with a question from you at home in our draft mailbag. Again, the best way to throw us your support, go on to Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Leave us a rating, leave us a comment. Really appreciate everybody that has done that. It is the best way to throw us your support here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. Let's kick things off now. Top of the show, as always, it's time for Scout Stories.
Pull up a seat. It's time for Scout Stories.
All right, joining us to talk about Eagles running back Corey Clement is Senior Director of College Scouting, Ahsante Patch. And Patch, welcome back to the show, man. I wanted to talk about Eagles running back Corey Clement. And, coming out, he was an undrafted free agent. And there was always like this allure, around the Wisconsin running backs and the production they've been able to have. But, they didn't produce at the NFL level all the time. I'm interested to kind of get your memories on scouting Corey and your experiences with him leading up to the NFL draft.
Yeah, Corey had a really, unfortunately for Corey at Wisconsin, he was hurt, up to his last year, basically. I mean, he had a procedure a couple of times. And so really his lone year was his last year. But he made the most of what he had that last year at Wisconsin. And, he kind of fell through the cracks going undrafted, because of the injury history probably. And just his testing numbers weren't great. But he's a local kid. He was a highly touted kid, obviously going to Wisconsin, and it's unfortunate he had the injury history going into at Wisconsin. Otherwise, he would have been drafted for sure. But he ran I think 1,300 yards in his last year and only season starting at Wisconsin that year.
Yeah, he was a guy too. Like I mentioned, when you have those that history, going back to Ron Dane at Wisconsin, and, so many guys that have been so productive in that school, despite the change in coaching staffs, despite the change in systems. For our listeners, I feel like that gets talked about a lot is like, oh, well, stay away from the Wisconsin running back, or, back when I remember when I was in high school, it was like, oh, the Florida receivers, don't touch the Florida receivers. They never work out. How do you kind of fight through that as a scout when you're, evaluating these guys on an individual basis, so year over year?
Yeah, he just, I don't know. And Corey had a great senior year, and I think he just got flooded out because, the injuries, and he didn't test well. But he, like I said, he ran for 1,300 yards that year, and we did the due process. He was a local kid, so people obviously knew him in the building and felt obviously really good after the draft. I mean, we had draftable grades across the board. So, after the draft, you're thinking, this guy's still on the board. Is it medical or is it, testing? And we were just happy as all get out to get him after the draft. Approved, the one thing we didn't see or I didn't see when I went on the visit, on teams, and geez, Fran, I don't know, his impact in special teams for us early in the career here with Coach Phipp has been unbelievable. So that aspect he didn't see. And, he was there, Melvin Gordon was before him, James White, those guys have been good pros. So take every case by case, but, we felt good about Corey getting him where we did and what he's done for us.
How do you, when you're looking at a guy that, and you said you couldn't necessarily predict the impact that he would have on special teams, that opening kickoff that year, the Super Bowl year 2017, he's down there making the stop on the opening kick. Are there things that can kind of be telltale signs for those guys that didn't play special teams, in college because they were a full-time player on offense or defense and they just weren't asked to, that say like, all right, like this guy we think could project to be able to do that for us in the NFL?
Yeah, and it's I look back when I was scouting out west, USC. I mean, Pete Carroll used to use all his starters on all the cover teams, all the punt teams, on all the special teams. But then you go to some of these schools and they're just too valuable as seniors to they're in a role on offense or defense that they don't want to risk their injury. So we had no idea that he'd be the impact guy he was. That the first couple of years he was with us. Even as a hands catcher,
Yep.
Talk about that catch. I just and that's the thing. Wisconsin backs aren't. Sometimes that's the knock on them. You don't see him catch the ball. But I'll tell you what, man. Talk about a big time catch that he had for us.
No question.
And we wouldn't be what we have now in that trophy case.
One of the biggest plays in Eagles history, without question. So, Patch, thanks so much, man, for joining us once again here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. We'll talk to you again soon, man. Hope you guys really enjoyed that conversation there with Anthony Patch, and it's always great to catch up with Patch. This week, talking about Corey Clement, and just a couple of the big things I think with him coming out. Number one, I thought it was interesting, kind of get into the conversation with guys from a specific position, coming from a specific school, having a little bit of a cloud based around that evaluation, right? I feel like that happens so much with the media and with fans, and I'm guilty of it as well. When you're talking about guys that come from a specific program and having that kind of moniker kind of thrown on them as, oh, well, he's a system player, or you can't trust a guy from that school or that kind of position. It's kind of interesting, especially when talking about Wisconsin backs. We've seen so many of them have so much success, and how you kind of get away from that. So it was cool getting Patch's feelings on that. To me, the helmet doesn't necessarily matter. I think when talking about specific positions and how they translate out of certain schemes, I think that's a little bit of a different discussion. But I think ultimately when you're talking about, the guys from this position group from this school, not the same conversation. So I was glad that we were able to kind of separate that with Patch. And then the other big thing is the special teams portion. And we talk about this as often as we can here on the Journey to the Draft podcast is, when you're talking about projecting guys to the NFL, special teams is a much bigger part of the equation than people might realize, especially when you get to day 3 and certainly with undrafted free agents. But, what can that guy provide you on fourth down? Because the way that really kind of clarified this for me is kind of thinking about roster construction and team building when we get to like late August, right? When teams all around the NFL are trying to cut their roster down to 53. What are the things what are the factors that contribute to those decisions? Well, very often it's special teams, right? And so you often have to take those same factors that apply in late August. Well, they've got to apply in late April as well. As you're trying to build these teams, you're looking for players that can impact you, not just on first and second down, not just on third down, but then on fourth down, what can they do for you? Do they have that ability to offer some value there, whether it's as a return specialist, as a cover guy, as a blocker? Obviously, you're not worried about it as much from a trench player standpoint, but what can that guy do? Because that will determine whether or not he is active or not on game day, if we're talking about a role player, about a back-end roster guy. So having that discussion, I thought was really fun. You're talking about a running back and Corey Clement, as I said there with Patch, very opening kick of the 2017 season. Corey Clement, who was one of the heroes of the Super Bowl, is running down. He makes the tackle on the opening kickoff, and that kind of helped establish himself as a member of this team. And I think certainly those things play into it. We all know about Terrell Davis and what he did early as an early young player with the Denver Broncos. Similar kind of story, right? But I think ultimately that's what allows those players to stick, is that if they have that 4-down ability, that ability to contribute on special teams, can help you land a roster spot and stick as you work your way up the ladder and then become a more concrete player in the offense or defensive game plan. So great stuff this week from Anthony Patch. Let's now get into this weekend's action with Saturday Scouting.
It's time for Saturday Scouting.
All right, time to welcome in Ben Fennell, Dane Brugler. Guys, let's talk through some of the biggest notes around college football. And we'll start with some Senior Bowl announcements. We had 3 new ones since we last spoke about this, and all of them come in the trenches. After we had that overflow the last couple of weeks of just name after name after name, things have slowed down a little bit. I think they're kind of fine-tuning. Some of these guys are waiting on some juniors, I would imagine, over the next couple of weeks. But 3 trench players, and we'll start in the American Athletic Conference with ECU left tackle Deontay Smith. Dane, I'll go to you first on Smith. I know Ben and I just got done studying him today, actually, so we'll give our thoughts as well.
Yeah, eager to hear what you guys think. I mean, I liked him as a developmental tackle. They had him listed like in the 330s earlier in his career. Now he's back under 300 pounds. And he moves well. He's got long arms for a player who's under 6'5". He's got 35.5-inch arms, and you see that length. I'm eager to see him in Mobile to see how he holds up at one-on-ones, because he has some traits that you would like to build on and develop, and maybe you have something. So, if there's a developmental tackle on day 3, he's definitely in that category.
I mean, he is a fast twitch athlete, gets out of his stance really quickly. I think he's got pretty light feet. His length is really impressive. He can get into defenders really fast. He's a little bit overzealous, I think, with his hands. He'll play out over his toes a little bit, both run game and pass game, and that can kind of throw himself off balance. But he's a plus athlete. To me, the big question will be, as he kind of gets more refined from a technical standpoint, look, I mean, you mentioned the weight fluctuation. From what I read in an article, he came in at under 280 this summer for training camp. Only played 1 game. He played against UCF in the opener and then shut it down after an injury. Has not played since and will not play. Is now going to enter the draft. So only 1 game this season. Had to dive back into some 2019 as well. But I believe he played in like the 280s, 290s for a chunk of the last couple of years. So I think when you look at Deontay Smith, you're looking at a guy with some athletic traits. He can get out in space. I love his play personality. His temperament is really impressive. He's constantly working to torque guys, get him on the ground. We saw some impressive second-level blocks. He'll get after it with double teams against 3 techniques as well. But he's a interesting developmental player because he needs some technical refinement and some physical refinement. But I think there's some skills that are work with, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. You remind me a little bit of Chris Hubbard, who came out at UAB at 290, has played a lot of swing tackle. He's playing guard for the Browns while Wyatt Teller was out. You can also see, I think Jim Nagley said Matt Pert at UConn last year. He's been getting some buzz from scouts, seeing a similar type of comp and profile. Skinny waist, long arms, athletic. There's a lot to like.
Yeah, I actually like the Hubbard comparison a lot. I know you came up with that when we were watching him earlier. I really like that comparison. Let's go to another one here from the University of Georgia now at guard. Ben Cleveland. This is a player I have not done. Ben, I'll go to you first. What are your thoughts on the Ben Cleveland addition to the Senior Bowl?
Not a skinny waist on this kid, I can tell you that much. He's every bit of 330. He's a people mover. He's nasty. Some of the names I wrote down just for people's perspective: Mike Iupati, Craig Urbeck coming out, Luis Vasquez. This is a straight mauling guard. He gets really good vertical displacement. Not the most athletic guy. I don't think he's going to fit in a zone scheme or even a scheme that wants to get guards out on the perimeter in the screen game. But if for these vertical displacement power teams, whether you're the Ravens or New England Patriots, there's a type for him. He's played a lot of good ball. He even played some right tackle early in his career at Georgia, but has since been pretty much the right guard, 3rd-team All-SEC last year, showed up on the freak list for those single-arm dumbbells at 160 or 170 pounds. So I really like him. I think he's an interesting player. He's strong.
He's one of those guys where it feels like he's been in college for 10 years now.
Yeah,
He started as a freshman, and he's such a big guy. I mean, he's probably going to be around 340 when he steps on the scale. So there's things to like. I graded him as a late rounder, so I was a little surprised he received an invite, but it'll be a good opportunity for him.
Let's get to a guy that I have studied and a player that, Dane, I know you want to talk about him later, so I won't get your thoughts on Alabama's Landon Dickerson yet. We'll come back to you on that. But, Ben, you and I can talk about him a little bit. 6'5", 340-plus pounds. This guy started at Florida State, was a starter right away as a freshman and played all over the line. You've talked about him a little bit. His versatility, but then his size and his football IQ, I think, are going to serve him very well moving to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a guy that was highly coveted tackle prospect out of high school. He played at Florida State early in his career. Has games started at left tackle, right tackle at Florida State, comes over to Alabama, starts at right guard, left guard, and has really settled in at that center position. So a guy that's played up and down the offensive line. Some people are asking, is he like an Elton Jenkins, who's getting a lot of buzz in the NFL right now? Elton, I think, was so much more athletic and light on his feet and versatile. I think Landon Dickerson is a through and through interior offensive lineman, some guard flexibility. This is a nasty, mauling player with really good size, really good experience, good in the screen game. He can move people. He can cut off guys, moving laterally left and right. He's a really fun player to watch. And for anything, he's just a nasty player. He looks for work. He finishes guys. If you're just dancing around or standing around the pile late in a play, he's going to come dump you. And I love watching those players.
No question. So let's get to some underclassmen that are entering this draft. And we've had a couple declarations over the course of the last week. And we'll start at the wide receiver position from Minnesota. Star receiver Rashad Bateman, likely first-round pick when we get to April. This is a guy that we've talked about a lot here on the show going back to the summer. He opted out initially when things were looking down for the Big Ten, then opted back in to play the first few games. Never really quite got in sync, it seemed, this year, as well, that's the case for most of this Minnesota team. But Rashad Bateman is a guy I know all three of us are really high on. Dane, no surprise here that he was opting out. We've already seen him declare for the draft by opting out of the 2020 season initially. But Rashad Bateman calling it quits here for the rest of the fall.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, he's going to be one of the tougher evaluations for me, I think. I mean, he's obviously a good player, but how good? Is he top 20 good? Is he top 30 good? Should it be an early second-round pick? I'm trying to figure out exactly where he belongs in the pecking order is going to be something that I know I'll struggle with, throughout the process, just because, there's a lot to like with his route savvy, with his ability to, set up defensive backs and create his own separation, but he's not a burner. You worry about the speed, and we've seen other quote unquote slower wide receivers thrive, guys like DeAndre Hopkins, guys like that, Keenan Allen. But those guys are also, I think, dominant at the catch point. And that's where Bateman he's good at the catch point, not dominant at the catch point. So I like Bateman. I don't want it to make it sound like I don't. It's just trying to figure out exactly where he belongs in this draft and, how early he should be off the board.
I completely agree, Dane, with the tough evaluation and where does he go in the pecking order. But I think he's going to be one of these guys that ends up being a day two player. And we reflect back on how did this guy go into day two, just like Mike Thomas and Keenan Allen in the third round and Devontae Adams in the second round, Allen Robinson. None of those guys tested particularly well for whatever reason. Some had injuries, some, had a loose shoe or whatever. But it's that same conversation receiver that you just think is a little rich to go in round one. But we're going to reflect back in 3 years and say, how did this guy not go in round one?
Well, let's go to another receiver, this time from the SEC. Terrace Marshall, we're going to talk about him a couple times today, from LSU. Had a nice game on Saturday. I ended up watching the game. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but ends up declaring for the draft afterwards. Dane, were you surprised by Terrace Marshall's decision, and how do you view him projecting to the league?
No, not at all. I mean, this is a player who, last year watched Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson get most of the pub, even though he had 13 touchdowns last year. And then he comes back this year as the team's number one. And even though there was inconsistency at quarterback, he was still dominant when he had his opportunities. Love the way he uses his body downfield. He's a long athlete that allows him to kind of run away from pursuit. He'll break tackles. And he accelerates really well out of his breaks. For a big guy, he'll collect his footwork, hit his stride, and go. And that allows him to finish after the catch, those gliding strides. So big fan of Marshall and what he can be. Just needs to become a little bit more polished as a route runner, but I like the tools he has to work with.
And I'm not sure if you guys have officials on him, but it's a rare situation. I think he's listed at 6'3". And I think he's actually 6'4". It rarely ever goes the bigger way. So I was kind of surprised to see officials 6'4", 200 pounds.
Yeah, I don't know if I've got officials. Dane, I don't know if you do either, but I don't.
Not on Marshall, I don't.
All right, well, let's get to the next player here. Sam Cosby, the left tackle for the Texas Longhorns, officially opts in to the 2021 NFL Draft, the junior. I like Sam Cosby. I don't love Sam Cosby. I do think that he's got NFL starter in terms of his potential and the skills that we saw. We talked about him back in the summer. I think I've seen enough from him to think, okay, this guy's got the ability at 6'7", 310 pounds. He's a natural athlete. I thought he was strong enough to drop his anchor and hold his ground. He's not a power player at the point of attack, but he's smart. He's tough. He's long. He's athletic. I don't think that he's a guy that is going to have too many issues from a physical standpoint to hold up. I just don't know if he's going to be a dominant, week in, week out player. I comped him to Taylor Decker when he was coming out of Ohio State, and Taylor Decker ended up going top 20 and has turned into a solid starter. And I kind of view that's how Sam Cosby will be. We'll see if he ends up in the first round, but I think Cosby kind of projects similarly that way. Dane, would you agree with that assessment of how I view the Texas left tackle?
Yeah, I think that your snapshot was spot on. And something that I'm encouraged with Cosby is just his improvement over the years. I mean, he really had a problem with bull rushers earlier in his career, guys that, could convert that speed to power and get him on his heels. But because he's not the longest guy, he doesn't have super long arms. He doesn't have that powerful anchor where he'll just, stop rushers dead in their tracks. But I think he's done a really nice job learning how to rely on his body and it's just his posture to create leverage. He'll bend at the knees, he'll sit in his stance, and he'll attack that power with leverage. And I think he's done a much better job of that, showing more confidence and just relying on his body to get the job done.
It reminds me a little bit of Eric Fisher, not so much the number one overall prospect, but more of how he settled into that job with the Chiefs there. But this is a guy that was all over your big board last year, Dane. If he came out last year, where do you think he could have gone in the pecking order of tackles? I see in November, I think you had him right in like the 60s. Seems like a pretty safe day 2 pick last year. I'm not sure if he improved his stock dramatically or not in 2020.
Yeah, I think he would have been probably in that conversation with like an Ezra Cleveland, somewhere in the top 50 range. And then, this year, I know some people have been talking about him as a possible top 15 pick, and I'm not sure I'm there yet. But I do think because the position that he plays and because I think he continues to get better, there's enough there to believe he can get into the first round.
Yeah, he's a really interesting player, and I'm glad that he came out. I'm interested to see how he ultimately stacks up in this tackle group. One last junior declaration we're going to get to today, guys, and there's a guy that declared for the draft on Monday, a name that Eagles fans are going to be very familiar with, Ahsante Samuel Jr. That's right, Asante's son, down at Florida State, declared for the draft. Dane, what are your ultimate reactions to Ahsante Samuel Jr. entering this class?
I'm a big fan. I think he's a first-round pick. Even though he might not go that high because he's not the biggest guy. He's probably 5'9.5". And, we don't see a lot of guys that size go first round. Like Jeff Gladden, he was able to sneak in there as a 5'10" corner. Maybe Samuel will as well. But he love his footwork, love the feel that he shows the position. I mean, in a lot of ways, he's like his dad, where his ability to anticipate routes, trust his senses, and that allows him to get a head start, make plays on the football. So he's a small guy, but he is fearless, and the reaction quickness is off the charts. So Ahsante Samuel is a good corner. He's going to have a long NFL career.
Ben, what did you think of Samuel when you've done him?
Hey, he's a guy I think is just done playing college ball. He wants to get to that next level. Interesting player from St. Thomas Aquinas and going right there to Florida State. These Florida State defenders, they have a lot of talent, a lot of upside, a lot of natural skill. Just really tough to evaluate them on tape over the last couple of years. It's one of these programs that kind of like Texas maybe 7-8 years ago where they weren't winning a lot of games, but all of a sudden Malcolm Brown and Jordan Hicks and Quandre Diggs and Aaron Williams and all these NFL players are coming out of there. Same thing at Florida State, a lot of talent, but you've really got to dig deep into these guys, whether it's, Kane Doe or Marvin Wilson or this litany of defensive backs with all sorts of talent. Ahsante Samuel Jr. is going to play in the league for a long time.
So every once in a while, one of the big wigs in NFL draft coverage, will drop like a new big board, a new top 100, a new mock draft. Ben, you and I, we went through Mel Kiper's big board a couple weeks ago. Well, thankfully, one of these things happened here this Monday. Dane Brugler dropped his newest mock draft, and we have to cover that a little bit here on the show. So, Dane, I will present this to you. Zack Wilson, number 2 overall. Let's talk through this. What were the thoughts on putting the BYU quarterback at number 2, I guess, ahead of Justin Fields? I think this will be the headline grabber for you over the next week, at least.
Yeah, well, Twitter's absolutely in agreement, 100% on that. No qualms.
As they do.
Yeah, no disagreements. It's very polite. So I really appreciate that, Twitter. But no, like Zack Wilson, I mean, I get it. The schedule is nothing that's going to get you excited. But when you break down the throws, you break down his decisions. I mean, there's so much to like about him with his natural accuracy, his ability off platform, the mobility that he brings. I mean, you see flashes of Mahomes. I'm not saying he's Mahomes, but you see flashes of that with his ability to, work off platform. You see flashes of an Aaron Rodgers with the way he'll torque his body and push the ball downfield. The natural accuracy that he shows it looks like it's natural to him. So I'm not saying that Zack Wilson is definitely going to be the second quarterback drafted, but I do think that there will be no consensus on quarterbacks 2, 3, and 4 in this draft. I absolutely believe some teams will have Zack Wilson 2. Some teams might have Fields 2. Some teams might even have Trey Lance at 2. There will be no consensus on the order 2 through 4, although I do think Lawrence will be widely believed to be that top guy.
Jacksonville's kind of a ball of clay right now to project forward, but I love the fits for the other quarterbacks. Fields to Carolina, Trey Lance to Washington, even go all the way down to Mac Jones to New Orleans, maybe taking over that Drew Brees throne down there. I love those 3 fits, and obviously it's really tough to project Zack Wilson in that Jags offense that we're expecting to be a little different, moving forward.
Yeah, he's certainly
quarterback conversation. Really going to drive things, right? The quarterback conversation, but this year more than I think even previous years, because you have these teams in the mid-first round, like the Bears, the Patriots, the 49ers, teams that could potentially move up for one of these quarterbacks. So it's going to be really interesting.
I think
Dane, you had one tight end, 1 running back, I think 4 receivers. This is a pretty nuts and bolts mock draft. There's a lot of trench players, a lot of tackles, not a deep interior defensive line class. This is a lot of guys doing some dirty work with their hands in the ground, and seems like that's the way the NFL wants to trend. I know there's a lot of teams that need offensive linemen, need depth, need future pieces, need cornerstone tackles. Better go get them while they're out there.
I think to your point, Ben, I mean, Dane, you hit the number of 4 receivers in the first round. On average, it's over the last decade, it's been 3.8 receivers in the first round, draft every year. So I think that number.
But I think the 6 from last year, I think people thought this year was maybe 6, maybe even more. I'm going to hit you with 2 quick disagreements here, Dane. I love the mock draft. The 2 I would switch out. I think I have Eichenberg a little higher than Mayfield at the moment. Not sure I like the fit with the team there, but more in the tackle pecking order. And the other one interesting in there, Elijah Vera-Tucker, mid-round pick, playing left tackle for USC. A lot of people projecting to guard. Similar conversation to Alex Leatherwood, playing tackle for Alabama. A lot of people think he's going to be a guard. Similar type of thing. I just have Leatherwood slightly above Vera-Tucker in the pecking order.
I love Vera-Tucker. I mean, I liked him coming into this year. I think he was, early second round for me, somewhere in the 30s. This year at left tackle, he is playing just out of his mind, I thought, just based off what I've seen, the 2 tapes that I've watched so far. He's going to make people really think about whether or not he's a tackle or a guard. We know he can play guard, but the way he's playing a tackle just really gives you more versatility. So I think that Vera-Tucker is going to be a top 25 pick. And then Leatherwood's tough. I mean, could he sneak into the first round? Yeah, I definitely think that's possible. He didn't make it in this mock draft for me, but he's just a rock solid player, and that's okay. If you're an offensive lineman, there are plenty of teams that need rock solid players.
And last question from me: who is the one player that pained you to not include in that top 32? Is it Barrymore? Is it one of these loose edge rushers, whether Roche or somebody like that? Who is that one guy that maybe hurt to not squeeze into the first round?
No, I'm not a Roche guy, but I don't. Maybe Ahsante Samuel, who we just talked about. Actually, a couple guys we just talked about. Terrace Marshall. I went with Bateman over Marshall for one of the last wide receiver spots, but it could easily be flipped. Ahsante Samuel, who we just talked about, I think could get squeezed out because of the size. But
maybe Dylan Moses, he's surprising not to see him in the first round. He seems to be one of the sliders going on right now.
No, he's playing better the last 2 weeks, but it's been rough for him. To me, Kyle Trask, not having Kyle Trask in the first round, I think is gonna dominate a lot of the conversation around it. But Kyle Trask is not a first round pick. I don't see it, and I think he's on that Mason Rudolph, Nick Foles tier of quarterback prospects, and that's fine. I don't see a first round pick. Mac Jones, he's tough because it's hard to separate him from the situation that he's in Alabama. with that elite offensive line, the wide receivers, Naji Harris, the play calling. I mean, it's really tough to separate him from that, but all he does is execute. And so I think if you're talking late one, maybe a team like the Saints, that'd be a perfect fit for him to get him into that first.
Who is the hardest team to pick for in the first round for you?
The Eagles are up there because when you look at it right now, they have a top 10 pick. If they have a top 10 pick and Sewell's off the board, is there another offensive lineman they could look at? I think that this is just a draft where there's pretty good depth. I really like some of the options in the first round, but the top 10, there's not 10 true top 10 guys, I think, guys that are definitely should go that high. So it makes it tough in the top 10 when you've got guys that maybe you don't necessarily think are top 5 talents going in the top 5 or top 10 talents, or you don't think are top 10 talents, but that someone has to go in the top 10. So for a team like the Eagles at number 7, that was a little difficult, but ended up going Jamar Chase. It's wide receivers 2 years in a row. It's definitely possible, help out that offense, that struggling offense right now. It'd be fun for, I think, everybody except the rest of the NFC East.
My last question for you on this mock, was there a player, because I know how mock drafts can go sometimes in terms of putting them together. Was there a player it was hardest to find a spot for, where you're like, they made the top 32 for you, but you're like, man, I just don't know where to plug this guy in. I don't know where his fit ultimately is in the first round.
I didn't expect this, but it was Kyle Pitts because, you look at it and, pass catch guys that are primarily pass catchers, not including like a TJ Hawkinson because he was so good as a blocker, but primarily pass catchers. Those guys, we don't see them go top 10, top 15 very often. Vernon Davis and Eric Ebron and, guys like that. So it doesn't happen a lot. And then when you look at it, it's going to take a really, unique fit, a team that's going to be open to that type of player. So, working through the top 10, top 15, it wasn't easy to find an obvious landing spot. Now, could we see a team surprise like, in Atlanta or Washington Kyle Pitts can fit anywhere because he's such a mismatch weapon. But trying to find the fit that made the most sense was a little tough. Settled on New England at pick 15, which I didn't think Pitts would fall to 15 when I started doing it, but that's just how it played out.
I could definitely see that marriage happening down the road, even though they did take 2 tight ends on day 2 this year. I would not rule that one out.
Yeah.
All right, guys, let's get into this weekend's takeaways. We'll start with our game ball. I'll kick things off here. Ben, you were a week too early, maybe. I shouldn't say that because Jared Patterson had a great week last week. But the Buffalo running back, Jared Patterson, I'm going to speed through this. If you carry the ball 36 times and then you still happen to manage 11.4 yards per carry, what? He ran for 409 yards, 8 touchdowns, came just shy of breaking both records for rushing yards in the game and touchdowns in the game. The Buffalo running back, diminutive in size, but the production, is just ridiculous here for Jared Patterson this week or this season so far. Only a handful of games played, but he has run for over 700 yards in just the last
700 yards, 12 touchdowns the last 2 weeks. And the Buffalo Bulls leading college football in yards per play. I love to see it.
And shout out to our buddy Ross-Tucker for having the call in that game and the passion in his voice when they took out Patterson late in that game was just tremendous.
No question.
Sounded like a gambler, like missing his overline.
Oh, please, what are you doing? It was great. I'll definitely have to hit Ross up on that later this week. Dane, who got your game ball this week?
I went with Cornell Powell at the wide receiver for Clemson. No T. Higgins this year. Justin Ross went down with an injury before the season even started. Clemson knew they had Amari Rodgers as that slot underneath target, but who's going to emerge as a downfield weapon? And Powell's been one of those guys. He's really blossoming now as a senior. He had only 40 career catches entering this season. Now he's at 37 catches this year alone. He's gone over 100 yards receiving 3 straight games. 176 yards receiving against Pitt on Saturday. He averaged 29.3 yards per reception. The coaches say that he really had a lot of growing up to do when he arrived on campus in terms of being a worker and developing his confidence. And this past spring, Powell showed up on a mission and, he really wanted to make the most of this final year. And he hasn't disappointed. He's catching everything. He's making plays over defenders. He had a 70-yard catch against Pitt where he somehow caught the ball over his shoulder with one hand. I still don't know how he did it. But I don't know that he's going to run exceptionally well during the pre-draft process. But he's gone from off the radar to a potential draft pick with the way he's been playing.
Yeah, he was a guy that we hit on our ACC preview. I believe I had him as like our replacement player or something like that. I got in buzz that he had a outstanding spring for Clemson before COVID-19 had cut spring ball short, and he has followed that up with a strong senior campaign. Ben, who got your game ball?
Love me some Cornell Powell because he's 6 feet tall. You can find him in pregame warmups because he's the one that stands out. He's 23 years old also, so he's definitely one of the more veteran senior guys on the team. Not as strong of a performance as Jarrett Patterson, but Oregon State running back Jamar Jefferson, and got to give some love in their big upset, come from behind win over Oregon, 22 points in the fourth quarter. But Jefferson, 226 yards with 160 coming after contact. He's had 100 yards in every game this year, guys. Not to mention, huge freshman year 2 years ago, 1,300 yards, 12 touchdowns, was everybody's all-freshman team, was kind of hurt last year, didn't play a lot. It's a really interesting player out there in the Pac-12 with a lot of upside, a lot of juice, a lot of home run speed and ability. You don't hear a lot about him. Once you start digging in, this guy's a big play running back. So if you ever catch that Oregon State team on at 10:30 on the East Coast, throw it on, check out the running back.
I was disappointed there was no like late night Pac-12 game on Saturday night after some of the action finished. I was hoping for one that took me into 2:30, and I don't. There was none. So missing Oregon State this past weekend, and they played Friday night with the Civil War. All right, let's go to our one play takeaways. Ben, I'll let you kick things off. We'll bounce right back to you.
Well, this isn't too special. It's just a brutal run play that really crushed the any comeback chance that Auburn was going to do in the second half. In the third quarter, Alabama, Naji Harris had a 39-yard touchdown run off that left-hand side, a brutal double team with Alex Leatherwood and Deontay Thompson. Landon Dickerson climbing to the second level. Harris pressing the hole, vision out the back door, home run speed, making everybody miss in the open field. It was just a beautiful run play between the tackles by a lot of NFL prospects. Naji Harris, Leatherwood, Brown, Dickerson, all those guys are playing on Sunday. It was just an impressive play. And to see them all celebrating after the play, man, it just gets me fired up to see the offensive linemen knowing they did their job in a dominant fashion and are excited about it. And I just love seeing that, especially on Saturdays in college.
Love that. I'm going to stick in the SEC. I'll go to that LSU Texas A&M game. I watched a good portion of that game, most of it. And the one play that stands out to me, it was kind of silly because, obviously Texas A&M ended up winning and pretty decisively. But it was a Terrace Marshall catch and run. We talked about Terrace Marshall a little bit earlier in the show. And it was a backed up situation. LSU had just gotten a turnover, and they marched down the field in two plays. And the first one of those two plays was this catch and run by Marshall. It was a bang 8 throw. It was a quick post. And on the move, TJ Finley hits Marshall, and he had that surge after the catch, that change in speed. That the reason why it sticks with me is that I didn't necessarily see Marshall that way when I studied him on film over the summer. I thought more pure possession guy, but that change in speed, it was kind of reminiscent. I don't know if you guys saw the play of I watched the Titans and Colts yesterday in the 1 o'clock slate on Sunday, and A.J. Brown had this long catch and run. It was a similar kind of throw, flipped the side of the field. Marshall kind of had that same kind of juice after the catch that kind of made me go, whoa, okay. He went like 45, 50 yards on the catch. He really flipped the field in that one play. Then they come back down. They should have scored a touchdown on the very next throw. It was a great play by TJ Finley, but I'll get to that here in a little bit. Still, the catch and run by Terrace Marshall, that's what stood out to me. That's my one play takeaway from this game. Dane, what was yours?
I'm going to stick in the SEC as well. Pretty impressive day for Missouri running back Larry Roundtree against Vanderbilt. 160 rushing yards, 3 touchdowns, 7.6 yards per carry. Also had a 23-yard catch and run. There was one play specifically that stood out. Midway through the second quarter, he ripped off a 21-yard run that really should have been no gain or minimal gain with the stacked box, but showed the lateral quickness, the body strength to escape, evade, and then shrug off several would-be tacklers. There had to have been at least 3 missed tackles on that play alone. You see the nimble feet. He'll run through contact. He's patient, but he doesn't waste time. And he's been a workhorse for Missouri. So I feel pretty good that Roundtree's going to be one of the first 5 senior running backs drafted. But we're going to have to see which underclassmen declare. That's ultimately going to help us figure out, what the order is going to be. But he's one of the top 5 senior running backs that I've scouted.
Yeah, I really like Roundtree on film. Everything I've seen from him, he kind of reminds me. I've said this before on the podcast multiple times. Reminds me of Damian Harris when he was coming out of Alabama. I think he's that kind of dirty work runner. Let's go to our down the road freak show. A freshman or a sophomore, not eligible for this year, but a name to file away. Dane, we'll bounce right back to you. Who's a guy that stood out to you from the underclassmen ranks this week?
I know we've talked about him before, but I wanted to bring up John Mechie again, the Alabama receiver. He just continues to produce with Jalen Waddle out. And just like Deontay Smith, it's not going to blow you away with size, but he knows how to mix his gears and his routes. He gets open. He attacks the football. I didn't know much about his backstory, so it was interesting to learn that he was born in Taiwan. He lived around the world, mostly in Canada, before moving to the United States for high school. I don't know if Mac Jones is going to be in Tuscaloosa next year, but I think Alabama fans can feel pretty good about their wide receiver depth chart with Mechie leading the way.
Ben, who's yours?
And this big old running back from Penn State at 6 foot, 230 pounds from Florida. Kayvon Lee had 134 yards and a touchdown against Michigan. True freshman, big old boy taking over for Journey Brown and that kind of changing of the guard in Penn State's backfield. I don't really know a whole lot about him, but he had some big plays. He's a big back. Looks like he's got a lot of juice in the open field and ran all over Michigan. So a guy to file away for later.
So I mentioned I watched a lot of that LSU Texas A&M game. Look, LSU's got a little bit of a quarterback circus right now. They're rotating guys in almost on like a series-by-series deal. I thought that TJ Finley, I don't know if he's operating as efficiently right now, but to me, like, this kid looks the part. He was the number 1 quarterback in the state coming out this past season, recruiting 6'6", over 240 pounds. He's a really easy thrower. He had some passes in this game where there's bodies around him and he's not deterred. He keeps his eyes up, steps up into the teeth of the rush and delivers. From what I can understand, just kind of listening to the broadcast, it seems like they want him to kind of come along from the mental standpoint and kind of see the field and know where his answers are and all those kinds of things. But from a tool standpoint, I'm excited to continue watching TJ Finley and see if he can continue to develop. That being said, let's get into our film room recaps here. One guy that we studied on film over the last week that caught our eye. Ben, we'll go to you to kick things off here.
A couple guys I want to hit really fast. Washington defensive end, Zion Tupuola-Fetui. All right, so Tupuola-Fetui. Zion Tupuola-Fetui.
Okay.
I just keep saying it. Whoever's cutting this audio, just take the best pronunciation there, all right? And if I don't get it, just put the Siri pronunciation of it. But really fast, he's 6'3", 280, rocked up, explosive. He's the Pac-12 version of Kwity Paye. I'm saying it right now. 3 games, 15 QB pressures, 7 sacks, 3 forced fumbles. Put on San Diego State, Colorado last weekend. Mustafa Johnson for Colorado and San Diego State defensive end Cameron Thomas were all over the place. Really fun battle in the trenches there. They're on opposite sides, but just watch those two. Cameron Thomas, he shedded that ugly number 65 he wore last year, wearing 99 now. Mustafa Johnson, 6'2", 290, senior. He's more of a squatty, stout guy that's kind of light on his feet, rushing from the 3-tech spot. But these linebackers, man, I think this linebacker conversation is all over the place right now because there's 3 I love right now not getting a whole lot of buzz or hype. That's Grant Stewart from Houston, Antoine Simmons from Michigan State, and Tony Fields II at West Virginia is one of my favorite linebackers in the country, having a huge season for the West Virginia Mountaineers coming over from Arizona. He's 6'1", 220. I went over the weekend and put on some of his Arizona's tape just to see what it looked like, to see if maybe I missed something. Put on the Stanford tape, the Oregon tape. This guy's all over the field. He's playing will linebacker, but he moves like a safety. He's tough. He's physical. He's an edgy tone setter. He'll cover linebackers and running backs. Great underneath zones. He's a sub rusher, QB spies, excellent short area quickness and play ID to beat backside cutoffs and to attack screens. Really impressive player. He's a fun prospect, but I don't think he's getting enough buzz. Fields and Stewart heading to the Senior Bowl. I'm hoping Simmons gets the call there from Michigan State.
Yeah, he's a bunch of names there to hit on, a couple that we'll see down in Mobile. One other guy we will see down in Mobile that I hit on is the Missouri safety duo. We talked about Tyree Gillespie a lot. I want to talk about Josh Bledsoe, his teammate. And I think Gillespie is the better prospect. I think he's got better tools, but I will say that I don't want to sleep on Bledsoe because this is a guy that can play down in the nickel, has done that over the course of this season. Just some guys that I saw him matched up one-on-one with. And again, this is a safety coming down and playing in the slot. Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, both from Alabama, Kyle Pitts from Florida, Kadarius Toney, Terrace Marshall at LSU, Racey McMath. I mean, some of the best playmakers in college football. I watched 3 games with this Missouri defense, and they were confident leaving him one-on-one against those guys. Did it always go well? Not quite. That being said, the fact that they were willing to leave him there, I think speaks a lot to ultimately the coaching staff's faith in this guy. And then also, he's got that ability to hang with running backs, H-backs, tight ends, maybe some bigger slots in the NFL at 6 foot, 200. I think he's got a really good feel for playing underneath zone coverage. I think he's good with his eyes to the football. I think he's in good shape. Like I said, I think he's got that skill set to play man-to-man against backs and tight ends. He's very comfortable up near the box against the run. He's he's definitely a new age strong safety in terms of how I feel like most of those guys are being used in today's game. He's a good tackler. Is he a starter? Probably not. Probably not a pure 3-down player, a guy that I would want playing on every down in an ideal scenario. But if you're saying, hey, he's going to play in sub package in our big nickel or big dime and, and kind of be a role player from that standpoint, I could see that with Josh Bledsoe, and I liked watching his film. I think that with Tyree Gillespie, I think there's a little bit more volatility there and maybe a little bit more bust factor. With Bledsoe, I think you know what you're getting, and I'll take that, especially in that role. So I did like Josh Bledsoe. Dane, I know you've studied him as well. I don't know if you got any comment on Bledsoe, but if not, we can move to your film and recap guy as well.
No, well, I'm glad you talked about him because Gillespie, I agree, the better player, the better prospect, has the more upside. But Bledsoe is not someone that we should be just dismissing as being, just another guy. I mean, he has an NFL future for sure. And a guy who, credit to Ben, because I know Ben's been high on him for a while, but Landon Dickerson for Alabama, I mean, the medicals might be an issue. That's something that's the red flag. That's the asterisk on, having him in my first round, which I never thought I would have happened. But studying him last week and then talking to people around the league, this guy has a chance to go in the first round, plain and simple. And it just comes down to the medicals, but he's, his first 3 years at Florida State, couldn't stay healthy. The last 2 years at Alabama, he has stayed healthy. I think he's probably a better guard prospect, but that guard center flexibility, it's there. And he could probably even kick out and play tackle if you needed him to in a pinch. But I think he's ideally suited at guard, a big, brawny blocker, very intelligent. The toughness is off the charts. Ben kind of alluded to the borderline dirty plays. But he's the type of guy, if he's on your team, you love it. If you play against him, he frustrates you because he does play so competitive through the whistle. And so he does not let up. Easy guy to like. And teams that really place a value on their interior linemen being smart, tough, scheme versatile, they're going to love Landon Dickerson. So I think with that competitive makeup and the way he's wired, he's going to go somewhere in a top 60 picks. It's just a matter of how high. Could he sneak into the first round? Yeah, I think it's possible.
Just sorting through the draft capital on what it takes, versus Ragnow and Billy Price and Garrett Bradbury and, Cesar Ruiz and all them. Where does he fall in that pecking order of these centers that go in the first round? Does he have that ability?
Yeah, so it's funny that you brought up one of those names, Ben, because as Dane was talking about him, he's still fresh in my mind because I just studied him this morning along with Deontay Brown. And the Frank Ragnow comp actually isn't bad. I think when you look at their dimensions, Frank Ragnow also played both guard and center at Arkansas. I think when you look at their skill set and what they kind of bring, Ragnow was a more experienced player just because he was more durable during his time at Arkansas. And the medical, I think, will be big for him in terms of Landon Dickerson. But he's that kind of player. I mean, he's big. He's fit. I mean, he is thick. He carries those pads really well. I mean, he looks the part for sure. He's not an explosive athlete, but I think he's good enough there across the board. I don't know that you have the same limitations that you would have with Deontay Brown in space, but I'll tell you what, with Dickerson, he checks a lot of boxes. And, from what I could tell, he is known well for his football intelligence as well as football character. I know when he was at Florida State and the time that he spent away, coaches kind of raved about, hey, look, we're really missing what he brings to the off the field as well, not just on the field. So, Landon Dickerson, a really an interesting prospect, and I'm glad we were able to break him down. And again, he will be at the Senior Bowl, as we talked about earlier in the show. All right, guys, we've talked about a lot of guys. Like I always say, though, let's talk about 3 more. Let's go on the clock.
On the clock.
We're back for another edition of On the Clock. Our friend Chris McPherson, CMAC. Welcome back. Hope you guys had a good holiday weekend, and we'll get things going here to kick things off for On the Clock.
Still a little bit of a hangover from all the turkey and stuff from the weekend. So, this is a nice way to kind of ease back into it here, just to settle in and get to hear some hot takes on whatever the topic du jour is.
Well, this week we kind of bounced around a couple different topic ideas, and the one that I landed on was effectiveness in the red zone. We know that it's one of the most important areas of the game. So which skill player would the group of us take if we wanted somebody in the red zone? Now, we took out quarterbacks, so we went running back, wide receiver, and tight ends. If you could pick one guy to have in the red zone, who are you going to pick? Dane had the first selection, so he will lead us off here this week. Ben had the second pick. I had the third pick. The current score on the leaderboard as I check it, I have 5 wins. Ben's got 4 wins. Dane has 3 and has not won in about a month and a half. It's been the first week of October since Dane came away with a W. But we'll see if Dane can change that as he kicks off this argument here.
Yeah, time to change that right now. And to be completely honest, I was pretty happy I had the first pick for this question because I think there's a clear answer here, and that's Florida's talented tight end, Kyle Pitts. The best way I can sum him up, he's a cheat code. Tight end size, 6'6", 240 pounds, special athleticism, has that natural twitch to him where he can get the upper hand quickly against defenders one-on-one. And his best trait, it's the pass-catching skills. I make sure and not overuse the word elite when talking about prospects, saving it for just the rare occasions where it's really appropriate. And when talking about Pitts' pass-catching skills, elite is the only word that's appropriate. It doesn't matter what coverage is doing, what defenders are doing, his body control, focus, the reflexes, they're all at an elite level. And the stats, they match the traits. In the red zone this season, Pitts has been targeted 11 times. He has 9 catches, 8 of those being touchdowns. No player in college football has more red zone touchdowns this season than Pitts. So the length, the athleticism, the hand-eye coordination, he is the type of pass catcher who is always open, even when he's covered. And that's exactly what you want in the red zone.
Look at that. Wow. Strong out of the gate here. So, Fran, any
Kyle Pitts is a great player. He's a dynamic player. He's from the Philly area, CMAC. He grew up in Philadelphia, went to Abington High School, or around the corner from where I live, and then transferred to Archbishop Wood, I believe. But I think when you look, he's certainly one of the most dynamic playmakers in college football. He's automatic down inside the 20, but we'll see if that's enough. We'll see if that's enough here because I think we've got 3 good arguments here to be made.
All right, so before we get into Ben's, Dane, if the draft were today, and obviously it's not, where is he going? I think back to where the tight ends have gone in recent years. T.J. Hawkinson went in the top 10, but we didn't have one until the second round this past year. I believe Cole Kmet was the first one off the board. So where is Pitts going to fall in the discussion?
That's an interesting question because he's different. He's more of a pass catcher where Hawkinson was, such a dominant run blocker and, you could leave him out there in any situation. Pitts is more of that hybrid, versatile receiver who you can leave him in line, but the reason you're going to draft him high is because what he can do down the field. So he's not going to be a fit for every offense, at least as a top 10 pick, top 15 pick, which makes it a little difficult to figure out where he's going to be drafted. He's going to go somewhere top 15, top 20, but you look at the last 15, 20 years, how many pass-catching tight ends have gone that high? We've seen, Vernon Davis go 5 overall. We've seen Eric Ebron go 10 overall. O.J. Howard a few years ago. So there just aren't that many, but I would argue Pitts is right up there, when talking about the best pass-catching tight ends we've seen come out of college in the last few decades.
All right, so Ben wore the Dragons hoodie to try to make an appeal to begin with. Very good, always smart. See, you're on the board, man.
What do you got for us, Ben?
All right, well, Kyle Pitts, impressive player. He's got a great body of work in 2020, leading college football in red zone touchdowns. But let's spread out that body of work to 2 seasons because the leader over the last 2 years in the red zone as far as touchdown receptions is the LSU monster, not Jamar Chase, but Terrace Marshall. At 6'4", 200 pounds, has incredible size, length, radius, range, which you love to see down in the red zone when things happen faster in tighter spaces. He's not bothered by contact. In the release point, in his route stems at the catch point. You need to be tough at the catch point down in the red zone. He knows how to hand fight. He knows how to track the ball. He knows how to adjust the passes, uses his body in that 6'4" frame exceptionally well, knows how to pluck the ball away from his frame and protect that ball down in the red zone. This guy's got 15 touchdowns in the red zone over the last 2 years, C-Mac, 19 receptions on 24 targets. Extremely productive on a very small sample set. So he doesn't need a whole lot of opportunities to get that production and make, big plays down in the red zone. And considering they've had Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chases and Joe Burrow throwing it around, it's Terrace Marshall who actually leads that group as far as red zone production.
So what's interesting about that is it, you mentioned the stats over the last 2 years. What's he done more so this year? And how much has he been impacted by not having Chase and Justin Jefferson and Joe Burrow?
Well, he's been forced to kind of mature and be that go-to guy with Chase opting out and Justin Jefferson heading to the NFL. It's been a little slow with the new quarterbacks. I'm trying to work in the young kids, so the offense hasn't been clicking, obviously, like that prolific 2019 season. You're just not going to get that type of production. But Marshall has been forced to be the guy in an offense that's kind of struggling, in a quarterback position that's still figuring it out. He's been productive this year, but I just think it was kind of a quiet, unsung name after last year being that third-tier guy. C-Mac, I was surprised to see him leading college football over the last 2 years in that category. I thought it would be a Devonta Smith or a Waddle or maybe some of the other LSU guys, maybe even a Kyle Pitts who's been prolific the last 2-3 seasons, but it's actually been Terrace Marshall, and I love all the traits he brings to the field and then using those traits to get the job done.
Dane, Ben makes a strong argument there. What do you got to counteract?
Marshall's a good player. I mean, I like him. I actually like him better between the 20s than in the 20s. And that's not taking away from him as a red zone threat, because I think with his size and his ability to high point and go up and get the football, I do think he is a red zone target that can be productive. But with the strides that he has and the downfield skills, I actually like him better between the 20s. So, but it is an interesting argument because of the production.
And C-Mac, when he first brought up Terrace Marshall, I saw your eyebrows raise. You're a little bit surprised. The thing with with Terrace Marshall is he was one of the go-to weapons in the first few weeks last year. And I think he caught 6 touchdowns in the first 3 games from Joe Burrow. Then he got hurt. He missed a month. And after that, they never really got into sync. That's when him and Jefferson really took off with Joe Burrow. So I think when you look at Terrace Marshall, if he doesn't get hurt last year, maybe the narrative might be a little bit different. He did, as we talked about earlier in the show, he did just declare for the 2021 NFL draft. So he will be a part of this draft class. But look, Dane brought up one of the most dynamic players in the country at the tight end spot. Ben brought up a wide receiver. But let's be real, C-Mac. When you get into the red zone, this field shrinks, becomes more about the run game. And who better to be a monster in the red zone than a 6'2", 230-pound running back who just happens to be on perhaps the best college football team in the country, and that's Naji Harris from Alabama. Ben talks about this story often when talking about Naji Harris. Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe you saw him on a flight when he was in high school. You were going to an Alabama game. He was a recruit going to go visit Alabama, and you were like, oh, who's this defensive end next to me? And you look the kid up. Oh, yeah, he's a running back. And when you look at Naji Harris, that's the build that you're talking about, C-Mac, at 6'2", 230. But then you go into what he has done on the field. He was in a 3-man committee back in 2018 with Damian Harris and Josh Jacobs, who have now turned into primary ball carriers in the NFL, ran for 783 and 4 touchdowns, comes back last season as the guy, second-team all-conference behind CEH, catches 27 passes for 300 yards, 7 touchdowns, runs for another 1,300 and 13 touchdowns, really, really productive, comes back as a senior, and that has continued. C-Mac, we already talked about some of these numbers. Ben talked about what Terrace Marshall has done in the red zone. Kyle Pitts has done in the red zone. Look at Naji Harris in the red zone. 26 red zone rushing touchdowns over the last 2 years. That leads college football from the running back position. Then you get to as a receiver as well. He's caught 5 red zone touchdowns. That's the second most of all running backs, only behind Coastal Carolina's C.J. Maribel, who's got 7. You look at what Naji Harris has done as a runner and as a receiver, and this isn't just like all little dump offs. I remember that one of the biggest plays from that LSU Alabama game last year was that Naji Harris catching that sail route. It was sort of like a 19-yard touchdown on a corner route against LSU, showing off that versatility. Again, at 6'2", 230, he's fumbled one time coming into this year in his entire career. So you talk about ball security being so important in the red zone. If I'm talking about what I want inside the 20, I want a big hammer. I want a guy that can be versatile, catch the ball, as well as run it between the tackles. He's a power runner. Guys bounce off him at the point of contact. I think Naji Harris, to me, kind of takes the cake here. We're talking about overall red zone production. No one has put the ball in the paint more inside the 20 in the last 2 years than Naji Harris.
Strong.
Fran, remember when we did the short yardage on the clock?
Yeah.
Who won that? Was that Ben? And who did Ben pick?
He went with Deontay Brown, the left
Yes.
guard. That is
that Alabama offensive line deserves so much credit. And Najee's a good player, but that offensive line, man, their ability to create holes with Deontay Brown, Landon Dickerson, Leatherwood out there. I mean, it's that to me is part of what makes Najee so effective down there. So I like Najee, but I don't know, that offensive line, that's a strong selling point.
Sarkisian's just scheming guys open. It's manufactured touches.
Yeah. I want to see how many defensive linemen were on the ground for that sail route against LSU. He made a diving touchdown against a linebacker. I don't know how many guys were on the ground on that one.
That was a good. Yeah, no, he is a very capable receiver, no question about it. But when you talk about running backs in the red zone, it's pretty blocking dependent, right? I mean, it's something that factors into the equation.
And that red zone's 20 yards, guys, all right? We're not giving Naji the ball when we get inside the 5. What are you doing when you're at the 19 and the 20 and you still got all that yardage to cover ground on? We need some speed. We need some length. We need the Kyle Pitts. We need the Terrace Marshalls of the world. It's a receiver league. We have a running back, a tight end, and a receiver to choose from here, C-Mac. What's your flavor?
Oh, look at this here. So what you talk about, you're not going to give the ball to Harris, 19-yard touchdown.
Yeah, that's right. Man.
all very, very good arguments. Ben, was that story about the airplane ride, truth, fiction, or, I know you usually do the first man off the bus, the most impressive on the hoof.
It was somebody that was comparable size, height, weight. It was not Naji, but it was a similar situation. It was Dylan Moses.
Oh, it was Dylan Moses.
Yes, who was listed as an athlete at the time and was thinking about maybe switching to the offensive side of the ball. But the point remains true.
That's probably going to lose me this whole thing just because I got one detail wrong on that damn story.
No, like one small detail. Geez.
Wasn't going to say anything, but if you wanted to check the receipts and fact check, C-Mac, I'll play the part.
Listen, I don't mind being live fact checked. All right, it's just all cards on the table. We're not doing any kind of lying here on this podcast.
And I got to say, C-Mac, when you start hot and then you go on a big skid, a lot like the Jacksonville Jaguars with that win and 10 straight losses, the wheels are coming off. You're starting to doubt yourself, and I hear a lot of doubt in Dane's voice this week. He's starting to second guess his thoughts, his evaluations. But that happens when you go on a skid. So he needs to get a W.
This is supposed to be a sober podcast. What are you doing? No way. I've been more confident about this one than any of the other on the clocks we've done. Kyle Pitts is he's a cheat code, especially in the red zone. It cannot be defended.
All right, so I guess it's time to shine on my end, and I think what won it was one of the counter arguments here. Was Fran comes in strong with Naji Harris, lays out the groundwork, and then Dane comes in, guns blazing, saying it's all about the Alabama offensive line, bringing up the pass on the clocks, bringing up all the future NFL players are all along that line. So that on top of the fact that his case for Kyle Pitts was very strong, Dane Brugler, he's going to get back in the win column here, give him a little boost of confidence, and even things up here in this season-long matchup. So Dane Brugler gets the win this week.
Finally, back in C-Mac's good graces.
It's a good pick. No one's going to argue. Kyle Pitts and what he did in the red zone last weekend really showed off, the full skill set down there.
He is a dynamite player, regardless of where they are on the field. Well, big win for Dane. Gets the match a little bit closer. C-Mac, once again, thanks so much for joining us here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
All right, let's wrap things up here on our draft mailbag. Again, the best way to throw us your support is go on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a rating. Leave us a comment. If you leave us a question or a mock draft, we'll break it down right here. And I wanted to give a shout out to Sean Wolford, who left a 5-star review saying, great podcast. If you've got trouble following prospects during the season, they break down not just the studs, but the mid to late round prospects as well. Thanks so much, Sean. I know you always feel like you're prepared going into the draft season. Now, throw on a mock draft as well. Just wanted to breeze through some of these big picks. First round pick for the Eagles, 19th overall, South Carolina corner J.C. Horn, declared for the draft a week ago. I'm a big fan of J.C. Horn. He's really physical, really competitive. He's got inside-out versatility. He's a big kid. Was able to make some plays on the ball this year, which was really important for him coming into the season. Didn't have a pick coming into the year, but showing that ability to make plays on the ball while also having that competitiveness and that versatility. I'm a big fan of J.C. Horn. Chaz Surratt, linebacker from North Carolina in the second round. Really love this player as well. This is a very active, tough, physical, super explosive athlete who's still new to the linebacker spot, has only been playing defense for 2 years in college, started as a true freshman quarterback there for the Tar Heels, then made the switch over to the defensive side, and this guy gets after it. In the run game, he's long, he's lean, he's built like Anthony Barr, but he can make those sideline-to-sideline plays, still kind of feeling his way from an instinctive standpoint, but really love watching him play. Richard LeCount, the safety from Georgia in the third round, hard hitter, runs the alley, known for his ability to impact the catch point in that way. I'd like to continue still, kind of evaluating his tape, get a better feel for his overall athleticism, but no qualms about him in round 3. Kylan Hill, the running back from Mississippi State in round 4. He is a pass catcher through and through. He can impact the game in a lot of different ways. He's not a dynamic straight line athlete, but he's really smooth in and out of breaks, and he's got good hands. I like Kylan Hill for being that kind of change of pace back. I think that's what he can be at the next level. Ole Miss wide receiver Elijah Moore. This guy is electric with the ball in his hands. I mean, he is dynamite in a bottle. Just watching him, when you see his ability to take the top off of defense, but then also anytime he gets the ball in his hands, look out. He is a touchdown waiting to happen. And then rounding out the draft with some role players here, Tyrek Smith, the pass rusher from Ohio State, Michigan corner Ambry Thomas, Colorado defensive tackle Mustafa Johnson, and then Florida corner Trey Dean. Trey Dean is big, long, physical. He's like 6'3", he's over 200 pounds, has nickel experience, outside corner experience, even safety experience. So he gives you that versatile piece on the back end of the secondary. And then Ambry Thomas, a really nice, physical, natural press corner. So a really good draft there from Sean Wolford. Again, if you've got a mock draft or something you want us to hit on, all you have to go do is go on to Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, leave that mock draft in the comments. We'll break it down right here on the show. All right, guys, thanks so much for joining us once again here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. For Ben, Dane, C-Mac, and Anthony Patch, we'll see you next week, or actually later this week, right here on the show.